Here we go.
We're live. Okay, so this is the first edition of Curiosity First podcast. I'm here with my friend Hem.
Hello, Thomas.
Hello.
Hey.
It's great to finally be doing this after many attempts with weird tech issues and studio problems.
Absolutely.
So, good.
Good thing it's all fun and games, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, Thomas, I'm just wondering, so what drives you to do these podcasts? What made you want to do this?
What made me want to do this? So basically, I have an interest in a number of things, but if I go the route, I'd say secular humanism and free thinking. And I have concerns for the world and society, and I have a deep interest in culture, and I think there are many problems that are not being discussed in the right way, social problems.
Yes.
They either have too much of a political valence to them and tribalized in some weird way, or they're just ignored because they're not sexy enough, or they're not profitable, lucrative in any way. So, I mean, there's a number of reasons I started this podcast, but I'd say the main reason is to explore various ideas, scientific, philosophical, and socio-political, and try to solve hard problems and have interesting and difficult conversations with both ordinary and extraordinary people who have unique stories. Yeah.
Cool, that's awesome. And I'd like to ask you, so how do you think your cerebral palsy is actually added to your life?
Okay,
because I believe you have a lot of areas of brilliance that I don't notice in a lot of other people, and a unique perspective on a lot of things, and I really enjoy that about you. So tell me a little bit about what you think about that.
Okay, so I would say cerebral palsy, having a physical disability of any sort can have many different effects on people. I mean, it can make you wiser in some ways, it can make you bitter in other ways, it can make you more grateful. In my case, I think I was always able to, like, just aside from my cerebral palsy, I've been a fairly empathetic person and always liked to try to understand other people's perspectives as much as possible.
Yes, wonderful quality, yes.
And in my case, my disability certainly added to that, and the hardships that come along with that.
Yes. But
also, in some ways, it has jaded me and made me not the best person I could be, so I wouldn't try to over-ascribe too much of my virtue or whatever, or my values, to just having a disability. I think that's just me and how I was raised and the people I was exposed to. But certainly having a disability gives it a unique perspective, and it allows you allows you to have a deeper look into the nature of suffering than what a lot of people will typically experience, at least this early on in life, like from birth and onward. A lot of people don't generally face these kinds of physical and social challenges to the degree that I've had. So I would say that's probably where it mostly has added to my life, but obviously along with the benefits, there's huge hindrances, and I wouldn't like wish it on anyone. I think obviously some forms of struggle are necessary to gain wisdom, but we shouldn't have to suffer so deeply in order to get wise.
Yeah.
And
No, of course.
that's only one way people can suffer, but it's one of the most severe often, and it is pretty universal in some sense, in the sense that it only, like, you only have to live long enough and eventually you will lose abilities and deteriorate. Everyone will experience it at some point,
Of course,
unless
yes.
they're extremely lucky. And if you have bad luck, then you can experience it through an accident or a diagnosis of a degenerative disease or whatever. You don't necessarily need to be born with an acquired
Yes, of course. Yeah.
disability.
Yes.
Born with a congenital
Yes.
disability. You can acquire one later
course.
in life, and
I mean, everyone does at some point.
yeah. So I mean, it's one window into suffering, but it's not the only one. There's many different other forms of pain and adversity that people face that gives a window into suffering that is not disability. But I would say it's obviously one of the most, like, clear, objective, salient forms that people can point to and be like, oh, that is
Yeah.
something, right?
Mhm.
So
Do you agree with me that state of mind is so important? Like, someone can be severely physically disabled, or they could have an accident, or they could be born with a disability like cerebral palsy. However, someone else could be physically completely normal and yet not have the same state of mind as someone with a physical disability. So to me, I really feel that state of mind is huge, and it's really amazing when people demonstrate that by having such a physical disability and yet such a healthy state of mind. Do you agree with me on that?
yeah, so for me, I would say the way I see it is people have a baseline often tendency, or they'll have a predisposition to happiness or sadness as a result of their genetics and conditioning, and depending how that goes, that can compound a certain way or whatever. And if you're lucky enough to have the right support systems in place, and I mean, there's no society on earth that is perfect, especially for disabled people.
Yes.
But at the same time, if you live in a society that offers more support systems, has a bigger safety net, and not just the right policies and laws and government, because that's only part of the picture, because a lot of what is actually good in the world is more downstream of culture than it is of like policy. So you can live in a place that has all the right protections in place, or the right services for disabled people, for an example, right?
Yes.
But if there's still some cultural lag, for an example, meaning culture has yet to care about these things that are now enshrined in law in some way, then people are still going to suffer. So I wouldn't look at just what things look like on paper, because it doesn't always add up.
Yes.
But supposing you live in a culture and a legal system that protects and looks after its disabled citizens and citizens in general, then yes, a lot of things is just state of mind. I don't want to limit it to just culture, because you can live in a good culture and a good society with all those things and still have a bad life because you live in a bad community,
of course,
or have a bad family. So I would say it all has to, you almost have to be in a perfect position, or near perfect. I mean, your life can still be messed up in ways. You don't need to be like a billionaire or have everything perfectly. But if you don't have a reasonably good family, a reasonably good friend group, a reasonably good community, and then a culture on top of that, and political system, then I think it is almost impossible for people, disabled or not, but especially for disabled people, given their troubles, to actually be in a happy state of mind. So I think if you're disabled, profoundly disabled, and you have the support systems in your family and culture, then of course you can be happy. And that will just come more down to the attitudes you've picked up and your dispositions and so on. That's going to be on you. But I just don't want people to have this idea that everything is pull yourself up from your bootstraps, because before you can pull yourself up from your bootstraps, you have to have boots. And supposing you have boots, then I'm all for the pull yourself up from your bootstraps, because fundamentally everything comes from like yourself, in terms of attitude, but they are so influenced and conditioned by your surroundings.
Of course.
And
environment is so important.
Your genes and your environment combined. So I would say, yes, obviously you can be very physically fit, able-bodied, and like be a track star and be depressed because you have some, for lack of a better word, a chemical imbalance, or you have a bad social circumstance. Maybe you come from an abusive family, or you're just running in the wrong crowd, or maybe you lost your job and you can be depressed. Right? So, and then at the same time, you can be profoundly disabled and even sick with some number of health problems and still find yourself relatively happy, and even extremely happy in some cases, under the right circumstances. So I think it's all about state of mind. However, I would not say that state of mind is entirely a self-authored choice. And this is where in psychology you can get into things like what you would call locus of control. People in certain cultures have more of an internal locus of control, meaning they think they are let's put it this way. I more, just to simplify things so people understand, but it need not be political. But just for example, conservatives are very much, you do everything yourself, you work hard, you make it, and liberals are more, it's everything that the system you grew up in dictates who you are. You got to be thankful for everything that was offered to you and all your privileges and so on. I think the more external locus of control, so leaving politics aside of it, because I'm not going to say liberals are right in their attitudes towards everything, even though I lean to that direction most of the time. I would say, as a matter of psychology and as a matter of just neuroscience and biology and physics, chemistry, we live in a world where we are influenced by so many things, and we live in a cause and effect universe is what I'm getting at. So, meaning that an external locus of control is actually the most factual or scientific way and philosophically sound and morally sound way of looking at the world, I think. But from an individual perspective, I think it's better to try to hold an internal locus control as much as possible to try to achieve things and not put the blame on things you can't control.
Yes.
However, when you're looking at other people and their circumstances, you have to look at everything through as if everything is an external locus of control, because ultimately we did not choose when to be born, or the gifts and talents we possess, or the disadvantages we have. So we just have to be grateful for what we have and try to improve the areas in which we're lacking. And if we can't do that, make sure we have systems in place that can do that, social and otherwise.
For sure. Like you had mentioned being a billionaire in there, like it's interesting, like if someone were to suddenly become a billionaire, they may be happy at first. But so much of it is perception and state of mind.
So much of it is
like
perception.
A year later, 2 years later, are they really happier than someone? Like, I mean, if someone's on the street, that's different. But if they go back down to just like, they start from a middle class kind of life and they go to being a billionaire, are they really happier than their original life a year or two later?
So much of it is about perception too, right? Because if you go into like the Indian slums, for an example, you can find some of the happiest people just because of the kind of Hindu kind of ideas of, I guess, life and the nature of suffering and gratitude.
Interesting.
Whereas if you go through more a Western lens, you might not always get that appreciation, at least not in the same way.
Interesting.
So, I mean, cultures will vary in how they will assign value to different things and different experiences. But obviously, if you're in an extremely bad situation, it doesn't matter what your outlook is. At the end of the day, bad is bad and good is good.
Yes, of course.
But
you have to have your basic needs met.
You have to have your basic needs met.
For sure.
And you can get into Maslow. He doesn't do that perfectly, but in any case, so in the case of the billionaire, right? I mean, certainly, maybe it's kind of cliche to quote him now that he's like gone insane and kind of got canceled, but Kanye West said, money isn't everything, but not having any is. I think that can be attributed to someone else before him too, but he's the most famous person that has said it. I can't remember where it originates. But I think that's a good point. I think wealth in our current world, the way markets work and money works, obviously it can help, but once you have abundance of things and then you actually examine your life, you might not actually be any happier than when you had less. You see the Anthony Bourdains of the world who had everything, had lots of money, recognition, their own TV show, traveling the world, cooking and tasting food.
Yeah.
who take on many different challenges that they
Yes.
opt into for
Yes.
fun, like
Mhm.
trying out jiu-jitsu and competing later in life and
Mhm.
getting really high up there, and still having issues with depression.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of human suffering comes from a lack of connection. So we live in a time where we're in a loneliness epidemic.
Hmm. Even some of the most famous people can feel so isolated,
Yeah.
right? So keep going.
Especially since the global, like, COVID-19 pandemic, there's been, but even before that, this was happening
Hmm.
due to social media and just how the world was going,
Hmm.
and various polarization, people spending more time inside, sedentary lifestyles, less of family, even like I think because globalization leads to that too. Like, if you put career first in a culture, in a world that prioritizes career, you can move to a whole different city or a whole different country, far away from your parents, and you may never see them again except for Christmas or
Right, yes.
some holiday. And I forget who said this, but there was an example given in some conversation I heard where it's like, this person knew a guy that was like called home and found out his dad had died, and he hadn't talked to his dad in like 3 years, but there was no issue between them. It's not like there was bad blood. It's just
Okay.
because that's the culture we live in,
Okay.
where it's not unheard of. Like, they obviously weren't super close, or they would be being in touch, but
Yes.
they had no issues, and they were close while growing up. And
Yeah.
he didn't even know his dad had died. He missed the funeral invitation. He was so up to here with everything that.
Wow.
So I think a lot. Now I'm just going on a bit of a tangent, but I think a lot of the kind of when you're talking about state of mind
Yes.
and like mental health, it kind of leads into. I think we live in a society that is becoming increasingly disconnected, even though in the technosphere we seem more connected because
Interesting observation. Yes.
You can Zoom call
Yeah.
your friend in Australia,
Yeah.
and you can seem like everybody's so interconnected in this.
Maybe it's
this,
more about quantity over quality of connection.
Yeah, well, that's one aspect.
Like, oh, I have 5,000 Facebook
but I
friends.
think
Oh, wow.
I think it's also about the richness, the virtualness versus the actual organic type of connection in real life. So
Yes.
so the kind of IRL kind of connection versus just being on the internet is very different.
Mhm.
You might have access to more people,
Yes, exactly.
but you're not necessarily truly connecting with them, and
Makes
we're
sense.
social primates,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we miss that. I think so loneliness is one thing. Another thing, and this is something John Vervaeke talks about a lot, the cognitive scientist out of University of Toronto, says, he talks on the meaning crisis that when we lived like in more hunter and gatherer times, and even after that to some degree, I don't know at what point, I can't remember at what point he says it changes. I haven't listened to his series in a while, but we used to get meaning from our tribe or from our roles and responsibilities in a certain community.
Yes.
And religion is one thing that is gone on the decline, and now people haven't found an alternative in many cases to fill that void of meaning, or why they're here, what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think religion was a bad answer often, but I don't think having nothing there to replace it is the answer.
Yeah.
Because that can often be worse.
Right.
You need some kind of, even if entirely secular or atheistic, it doesn't need to be. It can be New Age spirituality too.
Yeah.
But even if it's going to be atheistic and materialistic, there has to be some kind of value system or meaning granting thing that we put in place of religion. We can't just toss it all. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because obviously there is real wisdom in these traditions.
Yes.
And a lot of BS and harmful stuff too. But
Yes.
we can't just get rid of all that stuff and hope for the best. I mean, a lot of people will, in certain corners anyway, will argue, oh, we just have to be nice and loving. And I think humanism is a reasonably good answer, and ultimately that can work. But a lot of people have this faulty assumption that everyone can just be rational and then be ethical, because everyone's going to read philosophers and read the Stoics, read whoever, and get all this kind of wisdom. Read about consequentialism and form this kind. But not everyone's going to spend their time to do that. So we need to build a culture that kind of promotes or enforces that in some way, but that is ground up, like is not top down.
Yes.
From like authority or institutions. I mean, we need to bake it into our institutions, but we need to do it like from the bottom up. It can't be like top down, because that I don't think that's right, and it just doesn't work, frankly. I think the hippie movement did a really good job at this, and there was different offshoots of it. There was more the atheistic hippies, and then there was the more spiritual New Age hippies, but they all got along. So I don't think there's one way to get there, and I think everyone will take a slightly different path.
Yeah.
But you have to have a common. You have to have a commons where everyone agrees on basic ethics, even if there's divergence.
I totally agree.
In certain areas, and we have to have an epistemic commons as well, meaning knowledge. The things we know, we can't all have our own facts. We can have our own opinions, but we have to be as grounded to facts as much as possible, and keep revising our worldview or our perspective on things with new information, and updating ourselves. And I don't think the only ways of knowing are like logic and empiricism. Scientific method is good for a lot of things, but I think there are elements or parts of experience that we might want to call not purely in the rationalistic frame. They need not be irrational, but they're irrational, meaning that they're from this other part. They can be from the more spiritual, emotional side of ourselves. And I don't think that sometimes it's wrong. I mean, Daniel talks about this, Schmachtenberger, that is, John Vervaeke, meaning that there's a difference between like propositional truth and like other forms of truth. And I think you can hold more than one truth in your head without necessarily making a contradiction. It depends on what those things are, of course, but I think there's different ways of knowing different things.